Joining me now, the senator you just saw there, Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware. He is a member of the Appropriations, Foreign Relations, and Judiciary Committees and joins us now from the Munich Security Conference. Senator, awfully glad to have you here. We're going to get to U.S. messaging and the meltdown in Munich in just a moment. But first, what are the biggest red flags for you about Kash Patel's nomination? And do you expect your Republican colleagues will make him the next FBI director?
Alex, they should not. We should vote down Kash Patel. But I am gravely concerned that there are no Republicans at this point expressing concerns about him or voting against him. He came out of the Judiciary Committee last week and is scheduled for a floor vote later this week. We're going to push the time as much as we can, but eventually I think he will be confirmed. His conduct over the last couple of years, the book he wrote, the many interviews he did, the campaign rallies he spoke at, the podcast interviews he did, lay the groundwork for the questioning that I and many other Democrats presented him with in his confirmation hearing. Although he tried to sound balanced and reasonable during his confirmation hearing, tried to say he was looking forwards, not backwards, wasn't interested in vengeance, he couldn't answer the key questions about political independence. We did have a period, Alex, in American history where FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was explicitly partisan and carried out completely inappropriate wiretapping of civil rights leaders, actions against Americans in our own country to advance a political agenda. And for decades now, we have had independent FBI directors. I asked those same questions of Chris Wray, a Republican nominated by Trump, who I voted to confirm because he correctly answered that it's critical for the FBI director to be independent, to be willing to resign rather than carry out an illegal order, and to refuse to initiate an investigation if it was for partisan political purposes. Kash Patel didn't pass that test, and I will vote against him.
So you believe that he will be in this position and be able to investigate and or fire anybody who conducted investigations into Donald Trump?
That's my concern. And frankly, Senator Whitehouse, Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, and Senator Dick Durbin in the confirmation process and publicly have raised concerns that Mr. Patel's already involved in inappropriate firings of some of the most senior FBI staff, leadership staff in Washington, and that there's already a purge underway of FBI directors who were simply following directions and carrying out their appropriate investigatory role in investigating those who stormed the Capitol and assaulted police officers on January 6th.
Let's move to your position on appropriations, which oversees the allocation of funds to government agencies. This week, 14 states sued the Trump administration, arguing giving Elon Musk's Department of Government Accountability unchecked authority is constitutional, essentially saying it stripped power from appropriations and Congress. Do those states have a case, sir? Trump says he's just trying to make the government run more efficiently and reduce fraud, which most would support. So where do you stand, and how much fraud has actually been found?
Well, when a new president comes in and there's a new majority in the Senate, it's absolutely appropriate for them to realign spending priorities to fit with their political priorities. And it's appropriate to ask questions about whether or not there's fraud, waste, or abuse in federal programs. But that's not what DOJ is doing. They came in and the president signed an executive order within his first few days and shut down foreign aid, for example, canceling billions of dollars in critically needed life-saving spending for humanitarian purposes around the world, causing us to stop in our tracks in our fight against human trafficking and extremism, pushing back against the malign influence of China and Russia. I'm talking about the work of one agency, USAID, but DOJ has gone into several others now. They've gotten access to critical records through the Department of Treasury, private records of Americans that I've gotten thousands of phone calls from Delawareans concerned about. So I think DOJ, instead of taking a scalpel and a measured approach and looking at fraud, is instead taking a chainsaw to a number of federal departments. And I think they're just getting started. They're going to do this more broadly across the whole federal government. The administration's already laid off tens of thousands of folks who are in their first few years of service, and it's causing real challenges for us in our national security workforce, in the firefighting workforce across the country, whether it's in our national parks or it's in the intelligence services.
You mentioned USAID, and this week a judge ordered the Trump administration to unfreeze foreign aid spending, saying plaintiffs showed a strong preliminary showing of irreparable harm. Other recent decisions have blocked the administration's efforts to dismantle, again, the U.S. Agency for International Development. Will these decisions hold, Senator, and what are the consequences if they don't?
Well, I hope they will, but frankly, what's more urgent is that the money get turned back on because there are so many different nonprofits that work in partnership with USAID around the world. Nonprofits that are household names like World Vision or Catholic Relief Services, Save the Children, or CARE that are already publicly announcing that they have laid off hundreds or thousands of their staff around the world in life-saving missions. I hope that the judge's order will be respected, that the layoffs and firings and the freezing of funding will be reversed. But there's already significant harm to our trustworthiness, our reliability as a partner, and to life-saving work that's done around the world. And I'll remind you, Alex, it's just 1% of our total federal spending that goes into programs through USAID. I have visited them in many countries, and I think they do good and reliable work around the world in partnership with nonprofits that Americans know.
That is a sentiment shared by many, many people around the world, Senator. Let me get to the Munich Security Conference where you are and where there is also much anxiety around Donald Trump's handling of the war in Ukraine following his call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth left some confusion after his comments about Ukraine before then backtracking on some of that. Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Republican Roger Wicker was critical of Hegseth's comments, calling them a rookie mistake. I'm curious your reaction, and are you clear on the U.S. policy on Ukraine in this administration?
I am not at all clear on what the Trump administration's negotiating strategy is and what their policy is. I'm with a large bipartisan delegation from the Senate here. There's another one from the House. And we've met with literally a dozen European heads of state, foreign ministers, defense ministers here today. These are trusted NATO allies and partners who've stood alongside us as Americans have served with them in Afghanistan and Iraq and who have now worked with us to support Ukraine. Europeans have provided more military and budgetary and humanitarian support for Ukraine than we have. It's roughly equal, but it's slightly more from the Europeans. And they're asking, how is it possible that President Trump's Secretary of Defense would have given away some of the key negotiating points before they even got to the table? One of the core concerns I've raised today, as have many others, is that Ukraine needs to be at the table. Our European partners need to be at the table if we're going to negotiate a just and lasting peace after the sacrifice of tens of thousands of brave Ukrainians who have fought for their freedom and pushed back against the Russian army. I think it would be a betrayal of their sacrifice if there is not a robust security guarantee for Ukraine and if Ukraine is not at the table.